The guns had fallen silent. Smoke still lingered over the ruins of Stalingrad, rising like ghosts from a city that had become a graveyard. In February 1943, the once proud German Sixth Army finally collapsed. Streets that once echoed with the thunder of tanks were now filled with the silence of defeat. Over 90,000 German soldiers, cold, starved, and broken, raised their trembling hands. They had fought for months without rest, surrounded by Soviet forces, with no food, no ammunition, and no hope left. To them, surrender meant life, but they did not yet know. They were stepping into something far worse. The Soviet soldiers herded the prisoners together like cattle. Their faces were blank, emotionless, hardened by months of unimaginable bloodshed. The temperature was below -40. Frost bit through boots and uniforms. The snow beneath their feet was stained red with the last drops of a dying army's pride. As the prisoners began their long march eastward, the wind howled like a monster. The roads were endless ribbons of ice stretching toward Siberia. Men collapsed with every step. Some never stood again. Their bodies were left behind, buried in snow that became their final blanket. Those still standing pressed forward, driven by instinct more than strength. Just one more step, some whispered. Just one more mile. But for every man who stumbled, there was another who froze in place, eyes open, lifeless. At night, they were kept in barns or open fields. No fires, no food, only the bitter cold. They shared whatever scraps they could find, even tearing off pieces of frozen bread that had turned as hard as stone. The guards didn't speak much. A gesture, a rifle butt, a shout in Russian. That was all. After days of marching through endless winter, the prisoners reached the rail lines. Dozens of wooden freight cars stood waiting, their iron doors already covered with frost. Inside, there were no seats, no blankets, no light. They were packed in until no one could move. When the doors shut, darkness swallowed them. The only sound was the moaning of men gasping for air. Someone cried for water, another for his mother, and soon, silence again. Days passed without food. The dead lay among the living until the train finally stopped. When the doors opened, the cold stabbed their faces once more. They had reached Siberia, a place of endless white plains where winter ruled every corner of the land. Before them stood barbed wire, watchtowers, and long rows of wooden barracks. The Soviet guards barked orders. Move! Faster! The prisoners looked around, realizing this would be their new home. Not for days, not for months, but for years. Inside the camp, the air smelled of smoke, sweat, and despair. Men were given rags for clothes, a tin bowl, and a piece of black bread for the day. The work began at sunrise and ended long after dark, chopping frozen wood, hauling rocks, digging through ice. Many of them no longer remembered their names. They were numbers now, stamped on paper, forgotten by the world beyond the snow. Some prayed, others cursed, but all shared the same thought. Will anyone ever know what happened to us? Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months. The prisoners of Stalingrad learned the rhythm of their new world. Cold, hunger, work, and silence. Every morning, the guards' whistles echoed across the camp. Men rose from wooden bunks coated with frost, their breath forming clouds in the dim light. They lined up for food, if it could be called that. A ladle of watery soup, a chunk of black bread. The soup was often just boiled cabbage leaves floating in gray water, but to starving men, it was life itself. They learned to eat slowly, to savor every drop. The work never stopped. Some dug trenches through ice so thick that shovels cracked in their hands. Others hauled stones to build new barracks. Many worked in the forests, chopping wood in blizzards that blinded their eyes. Gloves were rare, fingers turned black and stiff, and frostbite claimed them one by one. At night, the wind screamed through the cracks in the barracks. Men huddled together for warmth, whispering names of wives, mothers, and cities that now felt like dreams. Sometimes they sang, quiet German songs about home. The guards rarely stopped them. Even they knew that these songs kept the men from dying inside. Letters from home came rarely, if ever. Some men would write on scraps of paper, hoping a sympathetic guard might send them. Most never arrived. Their families in Germany believed they were already dead. Disease swept through the camps. Typhus, dysentery, pneumonia. There were no doctors, only exhausted medics using scraps of cloth for bandages. The smell of sickness hung in the air. Death became routine. Every morning, the guards counted fewer men than the night before. By 1944, the war outside the camp raged on. The Soviet Union was pushing west, driving the German army back toward Berlin. Inside the camps, the prisoners didn't celebrate or mourn. They were beyond politics now. They only prayed the war's end might mean their freedom. But even when victory came, freedom didn't. The war ended in 1945, but the prisoners remained behind the barbed wire. The Soviets called them reparations, living labor to rebuild what Germany had destroyed. For years, they worked in mines, factories, and forests, rebuilding a nation that had once sworn to destroy them. Winter after winter passed. The strongest men became old before their time. Some forgot how to speak. Others stopped caring whether they woke up again. But a few, a stubborn few, refused to die. They shared their bread, lifted the weak, and whispered to each other, "Someday we'll go home." That someday came slowly. In 1949, small groups of surviving prisoners were finally released. Trains took them west, across the same frozen lands that had once swallowed them. They stared out the windows in silence, remembering the faces left behind in the snow. When they stepped onto German soil again, no one cheered. Their country had changed. Their homes were gone, their families older, some dead. Many people didn't even believe their stories. How could anyone imagine such cruelty? Some survivors were accused of weakness, of surrendering instead of dying in battle. The men who had lived through Siberia's hell were treated like ghosts in their own land. And yet, they carried something no one else could understand. The truth. They had seen the full cost of war, not just on the battlefield, but in the slow death of humanity itself. For the rest of their lives, they spoke little. But those who did tell their stories left behind a warning. War doesn't end when the guns go silent. It ends when the last prisoner stops dreaming of home. Stalingrad's POW camps became symbols of suffering and endurance. Even today, in the frozen soil of Siberia, beneath rusted barbed wire and broken watchtowers, bones still rest. Silent witnesses to a tragedy almost forgotten by history. And as snow continues to fall over those empty camps, it whispers the same message that history should never forget. In war, no one truly wins. Not even those who survive.